Hey humans, how's it going? Susan Ruth here. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hey Human Podcast. This is episode 358, and I had a conversation with Tony Green. Tony's an educator at Bishop Dowd High School, teaching Advanced World History and AP African American Studies. He's also co-moderator for their Black Student Union. This is his second visit to Hey Human. You can hear his first visit from episode 213. But on today's episode, we discuss history, the impact of youth on culture and politics, the importance of knowing cultural, political, and sociological history, and more. I wish I had had a teacher like Mr. Green when I was in high school. I think he's brilliant. I think his kids are brilliant. His students, I've sat in on a couple of his classes over Zoom, and it makes me have hope for the future. These kids are so smart. Okay, check out heyhumanpodcast.com for links, Hey Human merch, and to learn more about my guests and the show. Check out susanruth.com to learn more about me and my other artistic endeavors. Follow Susan Ruthism and Hey Human Podcast on social media. Find my albums on Apple Music or wherever you like to get your music. Please check out my relationship and sex show with my friend Mara Edelman. She's a sexologist and health practitioner. The show is called Are We There Yet? And you can find it on YouTube, Are We There Yet podcast show. Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for listening. Be well, be kind, be love, and lift each other up. All right, let's get into it. Here we go. Tony Green, welcome back to Hey Human. It's so good to have you again.
Well, it's good to see you. It's good to be here. 3 years ago, I think.
I'm flabbergasted that much time has gone by.
I'm telling you.
I'm so excited. I love talking with you. So thank you for taking the time to come back on the show.
Oh, yes, my pleasure.
Let's dig in.
Okay.
Tell me what's new in life.
Well, biggest thing is I've got a brand new class, Advanced Placement African American Studies. The last time we talked, I was teaching African American Studies and Black Nationalism. And since then, the College Board has seen fit, to codify this new course, which is, it's very exciting, and it's a much more complete look at the history of Africans and African Americans and their relationship with America.
Did you have any pushback at all?
I would say it's starting the class, no pushback. The rollout of the class actually happened during the pandemic. So we got the information late, which I'm sure a lot of schools did, and they were so concerned with the response to the pandemic. I think a lot of them may have, missed out on that initial rollout. But, I got the information within a week. So as a school, we really, hustled and got it together and, got that invitation and got back there to DC, at Howard University and, went through the training, met all the teachers and the people in charge and the schools nationwide and had a real good time with it.
As an educator, and especially as a Black educator, is your school predominantly people of color, or is it predominantly white?
No, it's predominantly white, but there's a real good mixture. The mixture definitely reflects the Bay Area. Can
you talk a bit, especially as the perspective of an educator, most importantly, because you have spent a lifetime teaching, but how much historically things have been left out of the education of our children in the context of not just white history, but everybody history?
So I would say if you're looking at 100% being the value, I would say 95% has been left out, of the traditional way that U.S. history has been taught. It's definitely taught from a Western perspective.
And could you speak to why that's a problem?
Well, I'll give you a little history about it. So, when U.S. history was first developed, what Thomas Jefferson had in mind is he had in mind the citizenship, education, for wealthy white men who could vote. So it was designed really to instill civic virtue amongst the voting population. So what it did is it highlighted what that population it may have done in their contributions to the development of the United States, and really left out everybody else, which is a tiny fraction of the truth. In how we came to be as a country and how we developed as a capitalist nation.
It's a major hole in education. It is interesting to me, as we see in the news, folks like DeSantis, who is trying desperately to cut out these lessons and these lesson plans, and how many people are so up in arms citing CRT is terrible and not even understanding what it is that they're rallying against exactly. Could you speak a little bit to what you think critical race theory is? Is that what is actually being taught, and maybe help people understand what it is all about?
Well, since I've never taught law and I've never taken a law class, I can give you my idea of what critical race theory is, okay, without really knowing, because I never taught law. So it's the basis is the idea that the institutions of the United States were actually developed with the foundation of racism, to its core. And, if you look at, historical fact and historical accuracy, since the nation was essentially, it was colonized, by the British, the Spanish, and the French, and taken away from the native people who were here, I would say that, those three groups put themselves in a position of power and influence legally, which allowed them to continue to control, the Americas still today. And so if you look at the foundation being, the basis of the foundation, okay, being giving advantage, legally to those three groups of colonizers, I would say that the depiction of, critical race theory as found in law classes is pretty close to being accurate. The case of Florida is interesting, since the first non-indigenous settlement in Florida was largely a Black settlement, settled by, Afro-Spanish speakers. It's interesting that a state like Florida, would attempt to censor, the version of history in which they are, the foundation, that African foundation that they have is totally censored and hidden from the population. It really makes no sense. But, again, ignorance is the foundation of racism. So I think, that's really the core of that, that conflict that's going on in Florida right now.
It's not just Florida either. I mean, people were screaming at the rooftops about it all over the place. I heard something. It was it's not enough to not be racist. You have to be active in your non-racism.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's such a profound sentiment, and it strikes me as so curious how doubling down some folks are about hearing that our country has a bloodied past and a sad past, and also a lovely, wonderful past. That there's a lot there, and to shine light on the horribleness is just as important, and how people were abused and mistreated and mishandled and forced to build the country on their backs and then thrown aside, or forced to fight in wars and then thrown aside, things like that. I personally don't understand how that is such a problem. And I don't know, for you as an educator, if you have a theory on why it is so traumatic for someone to understand that there's a whole lot of stuff that you don't know. Not you, but the world. You know what I mean? The royal you.
Right. Well, The idea of a loss of privilege because of a demographic change is very frightening to some people. The nation itself has more than enough wealth to take care of its entire population many times over. But I believe that there is a belief that if you attempt to repair damage that's been done financially to the people who have been wronged, then you are going to lose some of your financial advantage.
Are you referring to reparations?
Well, yes, I'm referring to repairing the damage. I had my students do a project in which they calculated the financial value, of Africans and their contributions to the entire Western world, including Western Europe, the nations that engaged in the slave trade. And the number is astronomical. If you look just at the 4 million people who were enslaved and you calculate their value as chattel, their value exceeds the entire capital of all other industries in the United States at that time. So just the cost, of each individual, in a plantation called Laura, Louisiana, the engineer that built their plantation was valued at $100,000, and that's one person, right? Because of his knowledge in engineering, he was able to build a 25,000 square foot plantation to withstand flood stages, of the Mississippi River, Lake Pontchartrain, and the Gulf of Mexico. So that plantation never flooded because most of the people, who were enslaved, had, great minds, right? And they were enslaved because of the value that they would bring, to the new colonies. So if that value was shared, by them and their families, there would be no need to repair this damage. Yeah, but the number of, the amount of money that they're valued at, and not just their labor and their production, but just their humanity is incalculable, right? So, and there's a fear that if this damage, these reparations are paid, that it somehow would hurt the pocketbooks, those companies who engaged, in this trade for so long and became wealthy off of this trade.
I wonder why it is that people find it so hard to put themselves in other people's shoes. I think about Henrietta Lacks for one example, that her contribution to science and medicine is astronomical, and that her family didn't see a dime, and yet off of her cells, billions upon billions, that's not hyperbole, that's just the truth.
Right.
Billions upon billions of money has been made, but not a cent to go to that family.
Right.
I don't think anybody on this planet would think that was okay.
Right. She's one example of, tens of millions over time. My class just did we called it our gentrification and redlining trip, of North and West Oakland, in which the students themselves, there was about a total of 70 of us. We went to North and West Oakland. We went to Lois the Pie Queen, okay, which is the oldest Black business in Oakland. Okay, we went to Marcus Garvey Bookstore, the oldest Black bookstore in the United States, and we went to the Black Panther House. And we actually, purchased goods and services to the tune of about $3,200 in one day. And if you look at, the amount of money that has been lost in those three areas due to redlining, and gentrification, the whole field trip was designed to show them, the property value loss due to redlining and gentrification of, these formerly African-American neighborhoods. And look at the idea of generational wealth and how much generational wealth was lost by, those families, who lost their properties in a very short period of time. My family is actually from Central Florida. They're from Ocala. And formerly, my great grandfather Fulton Wilson, was a huge property owner in Ocala. Let's see, he owned a bank, he owned a huge farm, he owned cotton gin, he owned a textile mill, and he raised horses. And within the span of about 60 years, all of that property he owned was lost. So it was never passed down, the family line generationally. And, after the Civil War, you had African Americans who owned anywhere from 16 to 20 million acres of property. And over time, all of that property has been lost. Speaking of critical race theory, okay, due to some laws and due to intimidation that cost 20 million acres of property. So if you look at the idea of repair and damage, the only reason why it's necessary is because of the theft that, took place in a very short period of time. Right. And a lot of that property is valuable.
Eminent domain was used as an excuse. Yeah, for sure. And eminent domain that's a terrifying law, and no one is safe from it. I don't think people really understand that. And it's that thing though, it's okay as long as it's happening to anyone else but me.
Right. In West Oakland, when we took that field trip, we also studied Dr. Brandy Summers Thompson, an urban geographer from UC Berkeley, and the kids did projects which she critiqued after after we took the field trip. There were over 750 homes lost to eminent domain once certain structures, 980 freeway and the Cypress Freeway, were created in West Oakland. Right. So that's part of that property loss that needs to be repaired. And a lot of those people now are the people who are living out on the street in the Bay. Right. Because when you displace, in big Victorian homes, over 750, you're putting a lot of people out on the, out on the street.
Yeah. And the same thing happened to Americans who had Japanese heritage when World War II kicked up, and they just started running around and imprisoning the Japanese and taking their property and their farms. That was a land grab as well.
Right. So America has a history of that, unfortunately, and it's something that needs to be discussed because it's history, right? It should be history, not propaganda. If the students understand, the students can actually deal with it, but it should be taught at a very early age, right? And then if you learn from the past, then you can actually make corrections. There's a Twi concept from Nigeria called Sankofa, and that essentially what it says. You have to look back to look forward, right? And if you don't look back, you can't look forward and make, the necessary adjustments.
Absolutely. And I think we're seeing a lot of history repeating itself in our politic and our rhetoric right now.
Right.
Which is terrifying in and of itself. I saw something the other day on a little news clip, a news bite, and a young woman had written a book about being woke in America and how being woke is this leftist propagandist thing. And I do think that people use wokeisms as a way to make it sound like they couldn't possibly have a lick of racism in them. It's their virtue signaling, I believe they call it.
Right.
All that. And one of the newscasters said, well, could you define what woke is? And she was at a loss, of course. She fumbled over herself, and it's since gone viral and all that. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? I think the bottom line is when you ask folks to describe what these terms are that have been vilified, they can't. They don't know what exactly it means. And I was like, well, then what does woke mean exactly? And so I did a little Googling, and it's a historically Black term, according to Google machines. And I thought, well, there you go. I never knew that. And and then the idea that it was appropriated from Black culture into now this white virtue signaling thing, like I'm woke, right. I'm woke, I'm woke. And I am a big fan of actions speak louder than words. I don't care what you're saying. What are you doing?
Right.
And there's a big disconnect there. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in terms of woke and wokeness?
Yeah, it means being aware. So aware of your past, aware of your present, and aware of the potential of the future. right? And essentially what it says is don't get caught sleeping or don't get caught slipping, because if you do, it's your own fault, right? So you should educate yourself and understand your environment, understand your foundation and understand your future. And that's why, African American studies is so important. What it does is it creates a sense of understanding why people are in the position that they're in now. Why is America in the position that it is financially? It's because of free labor over a 400-year period. Why are the people who are responsible from that free labor in the financial position they're in? It's because they gave up, their free labor for over 400-year period. They weren't paid for it, right? So think of if my ancestors were actually paid what their value was over 400 years, what financial position I would be in, right? So being woke means, I'm very well versed in African American history, and I understand why we're in the position that we're in today. And what I'm doing is I'm educating the future, right? So they could actually look back, understand it, and set a successful foundation for the future. And that's just not Black students, right? That's American students in general. So they can start to relate to one another, on a basis of knowledge and not a basis of propaganda and ignorance, which is what, we have been taught for so long.
And also to say, not on my watch again, this will never happen again. This sort of atrocity won't happen again. And it's a genocide. I mean, we talk a lot about the genocide of other cultures and peoples, which is important to talk about. But we don't talk about the genocide of the Black community, of which I think that's an appropriate terminology. I mean, there was desperate tries to annihilate and take away Blacks from communities and from society in general. And that hasn't necessarily changed. There are plenty of people out there today that think that there should be some other, not only city, town, country, or planet where Black people live, or Jews, or Chinese now because of the COVID racism. So you bring up an interesting point about the fact that you teach students. And I think one of the things that I hear, and one of the reasons I really wanted to get you on the show again, I think you're fucking brilliant. And every time we talk, I love it. But I think the fact that you are in the school, boots on the ground, as they say, teaching kids and opening up minds. And it's kids from all walks of life. And there is this rhetoric out there that, again, I would call it more propaganda, even that, if white kids are sitting in a class and this stuff's being talked about, it's going to make them feel bad. And we don't want those white kids to feel bad about themselves, which, first of all, you're not giving your kid very much credit. If you think that they're just going to be a puddle of self, whatever, because they're hearing the truth about the history of this country. If anything, you're empowering these kids. Do you find that the white kids in your class are coming to you afterwards crying, saying, I don't want to learn this. I feel terrible?
Absolutely not. Okay, what I find in my class is that all the students relate to one another as equals. And the more they understand about the history of African American people, or African people and African American people, the more they question, why were they ever put in this position of ignorance? Because it's not something that's dangerous, right? The understanding that, the oldest university in the world today, the University of Corrine, was actually started by two African women in 856 AD. Why is that dangerous? The fact that Abu Bakr II in the Mali Empire traveled, to the Americas almost 200 years before Columbus. Why is that dangerous? Right? After all, his brother was the wealthiest man in human history, Mansa Musa. So why would that possibly be dangerous? The fact that there were, universities all over Africa. Why would, white kids be afraid of that? The fact that you had at least 4 popes in the Catholic Church, or the greatest emperors of Rome were African. All right. Septimius Severus, who was probably one of the most important leaders in the history of Great Britain, he was an African. Why would that at all be dangerous? Right. And it sparks more curiosity amongst the students than it does fear. In fact, I've never seen a student cry in my class because of something that we've covered. What I've seen them be is engaged. I've got some really brilliant students, right? And the projects they execute are pretty amazing. We had, a mutual friend by the name of Eric Jones, who took my students, one weekend out on a boat, and we calculated, current readings, and we calculated, wind speeds. And, we went to, had a class on Angel Island where Eric actually gave, the students a lecture on the ability of Abu Bakr II to have traveled from Mali, to the New World within 40 days based on, the currents that were available at the time. So that's not dangerous. It's enlightening. And it really excites the students. That nonsense about, white students being afraid. No, I've got some brilliant students, of all colors in my class, and that's who they are. It excites me to get to work with them on a daily basis, as a matter of fact.
Well, the people who are afraid, of course, are the people in power who know that the more educated and the more unified the populace is, the more they stand up to bullshit. Right. That's what they're really afraid of.
Yes. Reminds me of Fred Hampton. The reason why, Fred Hampton was assassinated, in Chicago is because he created a rainbow coalition, of poor whites, from the South, poor Latinos from Chicago, poor blacks from Chicago, and they worked together to create social change. Same thing about the Panthers in Oakland. They created a unified body for a unified response. Education is dangerous, but it's dangerous to the status quo, right? It's not dangerous, to change things. It's dangerous to the status quo. J. Edgar Hoover said, the most dangerous thing that the Panthers ever did, and I was a participant in this, so I guess I'm a revolutionary. Most dangerous thing that the Panthers did was actually have a free breakfast program for elementary schools, right? And the reason being is because it taught them to think independently, and it taught them the truth. So it wasn't the guns that the Panthers used to carry around to protect the neighborhood, right? It was those grits, eggs, wheat toast, and orange juice. See, I still remember that today, and those studies of history, right? Because what they do is they spark social change, right? And social change is dangerous to the status quo.
And to show kids that we talk about this all the time, not just you and I on the last time we got together, but just in general on this show, that representation matters. And so if kids look around, they reflect back what they see. They're just sponges, as you put it, learning, observing and mimicking what they're seeing. So if there is pride and joy and intellect and powerful role models, that's what they're going to have in their heart, and that's what's going to carry them up through their life. Why wouldn't we want that for our children?
Right. Because then it threatens certain people in power. It threatens certain levels of privilege. One of the things that was attacked in the advanced placement in African American studies is women's studies. Now, how ridiculous is that? The civil rights movement was mainly young women. Black Panther Party was mainly young women, probably about 65 to 70%. One of the studies. Davis yes, a whole bunch of them. Elaine Brown, Kathleen Cleaver, Sada Shakur. You can just go on and on. One of the things that we studied is prior to colonization, the role of women in West Africa was extremely prominent. In fact, it was very difficult for you to differentiate leaders who were males or females, because the idea was humanity. It was not, sex roles, identified sex roles. You had women in the military, as you saw with, the movie Black Panther, and Wakanda Forever. By the way, we had, Masamba Dia was part of our class.
I've seen him perform, and
Yes.
I saw the video that you sent me, but
Yes.
I got to see him perform at the Hollywood Bowl. It was so rad. It was
exactly.
So good. Yeah.
Exactly.
So powerful. Talk about feeling things in your bones.
Yes. That's that oral tradition. That's that oral tradition. But unless you know this, okay, you're going to view, and this is one thing that a lot of the students are realizing too, that, for most of their life, they've been taught that African Americans were descendants of slaves. They haven't been taught that African Americans were descendants, of scholars. And so when you set that foundation, of reality, for, a whole number of different ethnic groups, you're going to view people differently. Right. And people are going to view themselves differently because they're going to have a sense of self. One of the, speaking of reparations, I'm going to be working with, I am working with a group of UC Davis professors and, a couple of professors from Johns Hopkins University. And we're going to take part in a conference called the ASWAD Conference in Ghana this summer, where we're going to actually look at, reparations internationally. From an American point of view, from a Caribbean point of view, and from a Ghanaian point of view. So we're actually going to look at the diaspora. And this conference was first established in 1962, and it was probably the earliest post-colonial conference in Africa. Right. So we're going to be, continuing this study, and we're going to talk about, how you repair damage in a number of different areas. Right. Not looking for a handout. We're talking about repairing damage that was done over a 400-year period due to slavery. We continue on, part of this class is repairing that damage. So when you're talking about, reparations and repairing damage, you're not talking about a cash payment. You're talking about repairing damage, culturally, spiritually, and financially. And so this study of history is part of that. Repairing of the damage that's been done.
During Black History Month, you sent me the video of the performance that your kids did at the school.
Yes.
Super. Yes. It was awesome. With your permission, I'll post it for people to be able to watch it.
Oh, please. Yeah. Please, definitely. Yeah, they really did a bang up job.
Oh my gosh.
Very proud.
That was leagues above the kind of stuff that happened in my school when I was growing up.
Yes. Yes, but that's what I mean. We really have some, we have some brilliant students. Yeah. So if you allow them to be brilliant, that's what that's what the outcome is going to be.
Well, and that's what's so frustrating. It's like, why you have these minds in these kids that you have the chance to expand them to infinity, and yes. All that will do is serve the community and the world and make it better and make it more vibrant and more exciting and move beyond leaps and bounds. I think part of the problem why we haven't seen a lot of technological advancement or medical advancement, we've been a little stunted. I mean, granted, the computer chip, if you follow the tech track, that's one thing, but I'm talking about overall in invention and innovation. We've had a little bit of a holding spell that I think it has a lot to do with the fact that there is all this containment happening with the minds of our children, trying to control what they think, what they know, what they see. And I think there's a thing, honestly, that parents are scared that their kids will be smarter than them. I think there's a level of that too.
Right. And it's true, because they are. You know what I mean? They are. And if you look at some of the work that my students have done, that brilliance really shows. That brilliance really shows. But they collaborate. Most of our work is done in group projects. So the students create a claim. Right. And then what they do is they work on supporting the claim after they've done this research. And they really come up with some brilliant things, like that Black History Month assembly you were talking about. Once that challenge was made out of Florida, the students completely changed, what that assembly was going to be like. And they just got, on the whiteboard. And what they did is they just mapped the whole thing out. right? They mapped the whole thing out, and they mapped the different, the different scenes out, and they did their research, and they just executed it. And it was all done at lunchtime. So we didn't have like 2 hours to plan it. Each day we had about 45 minutes to plan it, over pizza. And we did it within a matter of, from August until February, right? And that's what they came up with. And,
I mean, honestly, they could take that show on the road. When I was watching it, I thought this could be on Broadway.
Yes. And that's all. A lot of it was improvised, but they did, they really did their research. But, when you challenge young people, that's what they're going to come up with. Yeah, you present them with the challenge, have them do the research, and then so essentially a lot of the the research was actually done in class because it was curriculum that we used during the first semester, the first 2 units, a 4-unit class, right? We're now at the start of unit 4, but they could do a completely separate one, looking at just unit 3. Right. But they, but they're really brilliant and they're very creative. And it's much like that the package that they put together with that, AP African American studies course. Even with the information that was supposed to be redacted, that information is still being studied and used.
How do you, with such a wealth of information and of history to go through, how do you pick and choose your curriculum? How in the world do you curate that?
Okay, well, it's all based on, the source reader and the information in the source reader.
Collected by the school, like the superintendent?
It's actually collected by the college board, right? So what they did is actually created the curriculum, and month by month, we come together as a body and we look at the different, material and how to manipulate it, since it's still a stage. So a lot of what we're using now is information that's been researched and developed by university professors. And what we do is we decide how to disseminate it and use it. And they give you some ideas, in the curriculum of what to do, but you can also use your own creativity. And that's what allows, new teachers, since it's so complete, new teachers can go through the curriculum, and teachers that have been teaching for a while, can, actually create the curriculum and use the curriculum in a more creative way, based on what their experience level is. Yeah, but the curriculum is it's very highly organized. It's very sound, right? So, next year, the number of teachers, number of schools teaching it is going to expand from 600 to well over 800. I think it's really about time.
Well, that was going to be my next question, was given the success, and your kids are brilliant. I've sat in on a couple of your classes and it's exciting. Yes. It's so exciting. It makes me not panic so much about the future a little bit.
Exactly.
But are you, in your classes, are you sort of in the other 600 or so, like the beta testing to show that it's a really successful program and it can expand and expand and expand and hopefully move across the country?
Yes. Well, yeah, that's definitely part of it. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And that's one of the reasons why we get together on a regular basis. So we can talk about some of the successes and failures and some of the things that work and how we apply, different knowledge. We actually had a whole class where we cooked gumbo. And, and from, literally from, the vegetables and the crab and the meat, to completion. And what we did is we used that to show cultural creation of the Africans during the diaspora, right? And cultural retention, right? How African people, held on to a lot of their beliefs. We've had drummers come in, and how we held on our beliefs, during the diaspora, and how they may have changed based on the geography in the New World. But essentially the foundation, from gumbo is okra stew. The foundation of the drum, in Cuba, right, and in Brazil and in Panama are the drums in West Africa, right? You have different animal hides, you have different woods, but essentially the foundation is the same, right? We had a part of the assembly, we had a student, Quincy, do capoeira, okay, which a lot of people think is Brazilian in origin, but it's actually Angolan in origin. And what the Africans did on that diaspora is they just, manipulated it and used that dance style as more of a fighting style to combat, slavers. Right. So that's cultural creation. So we look at that in a number of different ways. We've had college professors, Professor Johnson from the Bahamas came in, gave a lecture. We had Amina Scott, who's a great jazz bassist, a former student of mine, that talked about the history of New Orleans and jazz music. We had Justin Hawkins, who he is a guitar player for Billie Eilish. Yeah, former student. He came in and played. So we actually apply these lessons of culture, and spoken word, broadly in the curriculum, because it's not a history class, right? It's a studies class. So we look at spoken word, we look at music, we look at food, we look at dance. Yeah, and it's all a part of the curriculum.
Where were you when I was in high school? Is my question.
Yes. Well, I was still teaching. Yeah, because I've been doing it for 42 years. So I was still teaching when you were in high school.
I wish I'd had you or someone like you. There should be one of you in every school, honestly, or several of you, to be fair. When I was watching the video, getting back again because it was just so cool. But I was thinking as I was watching it, listening to the music, I was noticing my body and how it felt. And I thought to myself, we all come from the same place. All of us, we're all descended from the same place. And when I hear music like that, it's as if my DNA sticks its little ears out and says, I remember that. It gives me shivers talking about it, but it's like it wakes up a part of you that is maybe sleeping or forgets it's there. And in watching that and listening to that music and the drums, it really does. It's like it wakes up your cells.
Like you've been there before.
Like you've been there before. Right. Like it's speaking your language, whatever language that is. The language before language.
Yes, the language before language, which was percussion. And that's where, again, Masamba comes. At the start of the assembly and at the start of class, I always say a prayer. I take it from poet Gil Scott-Heron. And it goes, now more than ever, all the family must be together. Everybody everywhere must see the time is drawing near, because common blood flows through common veins and all common eyes must see the same. And now more than ever, all the family must be together. And so it's true in every lesson, the start of each year, it's always that we emanated from the same place in East Africa 250,000 years ago, right? And as we migrated from place to place and experience different environments, that's responsible for the change. But we are the same blood, right? And it's actually passed through, through women in the form of mitochondrial DNA, right? And what history teaches, if you teach it correctly, is that we are the same people. Okay, we are of different cultures, but we're exactly the same people, right? And once we act like it, and you look at Sankofa again, once we act like it, we're going to eliminate a lot of the problems that we experience.
Amen to that. It's funny, I went to the doctor today because, as I said, I was getting over a cold. I'm still getting over a cold. Mm-hmm. And, when you go to the doctor, they give you that piece of paper and it says that all the states say, the doctors have to give it to you. It says, how are you feeling? Are you feeling desperate, alone, isolated?
Right.
And it says on a scale from 1 to 5. And I'm sitting with the nurse before the doctor comes in and I circle 3 on the 1 to 5. And I looked at her, I said, does anybody ever put less than 3? No. Are you not paying attention? How do you not? And it's hard to not get bogged down in that feeling. So it's why I get excited to talk to people like you, or, to see programs like the programs you're running. And I try to listen to those voices on amplification instead of the other ones. Although But it's hard because, a lot of my friends will say, oh, well, just stop listening. I'm like, you can't stop listening, because once you stop listening, you can't stand up to the bullshit and to the stuff that's wrong. So it's like, where do you find that happy medium of, you have to pay attention and you have to be a voice and you have to be an ally. We have to be there for each other, but also don't do it to the point where you take yourself out. But you kind of have to, because if we don't, who's going to protect the kids coming up?
Yeah, 100% correct. I feel the more that I'm around kids, the more optimistic I am, because they are optimistic. Right. And you can always find those, those students who are going to be the difference makers. So what you attempt to do is try to create them as difference makers. Right. And they have these great ideas. Right. And they think about the future, in a positive sense. Right. And you set a nice, comfortable foundation. And at some point, you're going to find that, that right mix, of change makers. Yeah, but they're definitely out there. They're definitely out there. And I see them every single year. And that's one of the reasons I love to teach and love to go in the classroom. Right. Because the students are so optimistic.
Yeah. And one can be a lot. And I know that one can be a lot, that it takes one voice and the one voice to speak up. And that voice, loud and confident and assured of who they are and why they are, which, I mean, that's what our teachers are there to help navigate, to help the seed grow, to have the deep roots deep into the ground, and to have the branches out into the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I can take, and I think we've talked about my, my papa, my stepdad before.
Military. He was in the military.
He was in the military, 1st Marine Division, Iwo Jima campaign. Right. He was drafted a year and a half after his father was lynched and thrown in the Mississippi River. So anyone who you would think would be, depressed about the future, but he was drafted in the military. Since he was Black, he collected bodies and body parts for 2 years. Right. Got out of the, the World War II. Re-enlisted Army Air Corps. In Army Air Corps, he was actually given a medal by President Johnson after Kennedy's assassination, because he was a mechanic and he built the pod on the Air Force One to carry Kennedy's body after the assassination. Right. So he was medaled. I got a picture of him being medaled by Lyndon B. Johnson. But one of the things that Papa told me is that even when he was medaled by the President of the United States, he still couldn't vote. But he re-enlists in the Air Force during Vietnam, serves during Vietnam, gets out and retires, becomes a church deacon, and he makes the best cakes and desserts of anywhere in the United States. And he was, up until he passed, he was one of the most happy people that you could ever imagine. But think about what he's gone through. And I always think about, if he could have gone through that, and I didn't even include the depression, there's always optimism, right? There's always optimism, and it's always out there. You just have to, a lot of times you have to search for it, and you've got to search for your truth and search for your meaning, right? And you got to push forward.
And amplify voices that are making a difference.
Definitely. Amplify positive voices.
Yeah. Which is why you're here.
Yes. And I appreciate it. I appreciate it. But, I get it for my wife and my kids. My wife and my kids, very, humble people, but they keep me on point, and kids in class.
You have a great Instagram and Facebook. I follow both, of course, but, and by the way, I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend.
Yes. Yeah. Gary Mason. Yeah. My best friend of 37 years. And you speaking of saints, speaking of saints. Yeah. We have a, Gary and Debbie Mason, angel fund, because he was always helping kids. So, people that contribute to that Gary and Debbie, Mason Angel Fund are going to be taking care of students who he took care of, students in need. Yeah, but yeah, very good. Huge loss for the school.
I'm so sorry. Well, here's to Gary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
May his memory be a blessing.
Most definitely.
Well, tell people, I guess, here's the thing. Like I've had you on the show before, and people are like, well, how do I reach out to him? So will you let people know how they might email you if they have questions or they want to maybe figure out how to get that curriculum in their school?
Yes. So I'm tgreen@bishopodowd.org. Yep. T as in Tony, green like the color, at bishopodowd.org.
And I'll make sure that link is on heyhumanpodcast.com.
There you go.
You're the best.
Yes. No, you're the best. I'm across the screen from the best because you make it happen.
Well, let's mirror each other in our bestness. I'm so happy you're on the planet. I can get bogged down sometimes. I know that I can't do that because there's important work to be done, and I have the luxury to not think about things because of what life I was born into, and so then even more so I can't rest on that.
And you think about the stories of our mutual friends. Think of Sedich Inich.
I love him. Yeah, of course.
Yes, he's going to be speaking in my 9th grade class Wednesday.
Oh.
Yeah, but I'm going to be going out on the water with Eric Jones, taking Gary Mason's wife out very soon too. Speaking of positive people, who've come from struggles. Yeah,
I've had everyone on the show. Not yet your wife, and we'll have to get her on for sure.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, she would love to be on.
Tony, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Susan. It's
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure.
And you're welcome anytime you want to come on the show and talk about anything. You have an open door.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you for listening, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Rate, review, and subscribe to Hey Human Podcast on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks. Bye.